The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Sofia Mendez moved quietly through the grand hallway, pushing her cleaning cart ahead of her. At 28, she had the kind of face that looked younger when she smiled, though she rarely did these days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her uniform, though simple, was spotless. This marked her 6th month working at the estate of Richard Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men in the city. Sofia had never actually spoken with Mr. Blackwood beyond a polite good morning or good evening. He was often traveling or locked away in his home office on important calls. The staff spoke of him in hushed tones, not because he was cruel, but because he seemed to exist in a different world altogether, one of board meetings, private jets, and phone calls that could move millions of dollars from one place to another. Sofia began her morning routine in the East Wing, dusting the countless picture frames and art pieces that lined the walls. The mansion was a museum of expensive things that nobody seemed to enjoy. She often wondered why someone would own so much beauty only to walk past it without really seeing it. Mr. Blackwood left for his meeting in Chicago this morning. Mrs. Porter, the head housekeeper, informed Sofia as she passed by. He'll be gone until tomorrow evening. Make sure you give the grand salon a proper cleaning today. It's been neglected this week. Sofia nodded and continued with her work. She actually liked when the owner was away. The house felt less like someone else's space and more like a place where she could breathe without worrying about disturbing anyone. By midday, Sofia had cleaned 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and the breakfast room. She took her lunch break in the staff quarters, a modest but comfortable area in the back of the house. The other workers, 2 gardeners, a cook, and Mrs. Porter, were friendly enough, but Sofia kept to herself most days. It wasn't that she didn't like them. She just found it hard to share much about her life. How could she explain that cleaning floors was never part of her plan? After lunch, Sofia headed to the grand salon. It was the largest room in the house, with ceilings that soared 20 feet high and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering views of the carefully manicured gardens. The room held several seating areas, priceless artwork, and in the corner by the largest window a magnificent Steinway grand piano. The piano was what caught Sofia's eye every time she entered this room. It gleamed under the sunlight, its black surface so perfectly polished that it reflected the crystal chandelier hanging above. It was, without doubt, one of the finest instruments she had ever seen. Not that she had seen many up close in recent years. Sofia began cleaning methodically, starting with the bookshelves, then moving to the coffee tables and side tables, wiping away dust that had settled during the week. As she worked, her eyes kept drifting to the piano. It called to her like an old friend wanting to reconnect. She knew she shouldn't. It wasn't her piano. It wasn't her house. She was here to clean, not to play. But the urge grew stronger with each passing minute. How long had it been since her fingers had touched piano keys? 2 years? Almost 3? Back home, before everything changed, Sofia had been someone different. She had been a student at the National Conservatory of Music, with dreams as big as the sky. Her teachers had called her gifted. You have the touch, her piano professor had told her, the rare ability to make the instrument sing with your soul. For 18 years, music had been her life, her identity, her future. Then came her father's illness, the mounting medical bills, and the impossible choice, stay and pursue her dreams or leave to help support her family. The decision had torn her apart, but family came first, always. So she had packed away her sheet music, said goodbye to the concert halls, and traveled north with nothing but 2 suitcases and the promise to send money home every month. Sofia finished dusting the last shelf and moved to the center of the room to vacuum. The mansion was quiet except for the hum of the vacuum cleaner. Mrs. Porter was in town running errands. The gardeners were working outside. The cook was at the market. For all practical purposes, Sofia was alone in the enormous house. She turned off the vacuum and stood in the silence. The piano seemed to grow larger in her vision, more insistent in its call. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sofia crossed the room and stood before the instrument. She ran her fingers lightly over the fallboard, feeling the smooth finish. With a deep breath, she pulled out the bench and sat down. Sofia lifted the fallboard, revealing the pristine keys, perfect ivory and ebony rectangles waiting for human touch. She placed her hands in her lap, suddenly unsure. What if someone came in? What if she got in trouble? but the pull was too strong, the need too great. Slowly, she placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness against her fingertips. She pressed one key, then another, just testing the sound. The notes rang out clear and true in the empty room. The piano was perfectly tuned. Sophia closed her eyes and began to play the piece that had lived in her muscle memory for years, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It started soft and hesitant, like a question asked in the dark. Her fingers remembered the way, even after all this time. The music flowed through her, washing away the months of silence, of being just a cleaner, just a person who sent money home, just someone trying to survive. As she played, Sophia felt herself returning, the self she had packed away along with her sheet music and dreams. The melody swelled, filling the grand room with emotion. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm. Her face relaxed into an expression of pure concentration and joy. In this moment, she wasn't cleaning anyone's house. She was creating beauty. She was herself again. The piece grew more complex, her fingers dancing across the keys with practiced precision. Even after years without regular practice, her technique remained impressive, a testament to the countless hours she had spent at the conservatory, repeating passages until they were perfect, training her hands to speak the language of music fluently. Sophia lost track of time as she played. One piece flowed into another, from Chopin to Debussy's Clair de Lune, its dreamy notes rippling like water. She hadn't played in so long that her fingers began to ache, but she couldn't stop. It was like taking deep breaths after being underwater. She needed this. Outside the windows, the afternoon light shifted, painting the room in golden hues. Sophia moved into a piece she had written herself during her final year at the conservatory. It was more modern, more daring than the classics, with unexpected chord progressions and a melody that climbed like a vine reaching for the sun. She had never performed it for an audience. It had been her private joy, her personal statement of who she was as a musician. As the last notes of her composition faded into silence, Sophia kept her eyes closed, not wanting to break the spell. For a few precious minutes, she had escaped her reality. She had returned to the person she was meant to be. That was extraordinary. Sophia's eyes flew open and her body jerked in surprise. Standing in the doorway was a man she recognized immediately, Richard Blackwood himself. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in Chicago until tomorrow. Sophia jumped to her feet, nearly knocking over the piano bench. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have." The words tumbled out in a panic as her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. She had been caught doing something she clearly shouldn't have been doing while on the job. Richard Blackwood stood perfectly still, as if frozen in place by what he had heard. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of face that business magazines put on their covers. Handsome in a serious way, with lines that spoke of both stress and authority. His gray suit looked like it cost more than Sophia made in 3 months. "Please," he said, raising a hand to stop her apologies. "Don't apologize for something so beautiful." Sophia stared at him, unable to read his expression. Was he angry? Was she about to lose her job? She needed this job. Her family depended on it. "I thought you were in Chicago until tomorrow," she said, then immediately regretted speaking at all. It wasn't her place to comment on his schedule. "Meeting ended early," he replied simply, then gestured to the piano. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Sophia hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I studied at the National Conservatory in my country before I came here." Mr. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. "The National Conservatory? That's not exactly a small achievement. Why are you—" He stopped himself, perhaps realizing the question might be too personal. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Sophia stood with her hands clasped in front of her, wishing she could disappear. Mr. Blackwood continued to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite place. Surprise mixed with something else. "Curiosity, perhaps, that last piece," he finally said. "I don't recognize it." "It's nothing," Sophia replied quickly. "Just something I wrote a long time ago." "You composed that?" The surprise in his voice was unmistakable now. Sophia nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. She waited for him to dismiss her, to tell her to get back to work, or worse, to tell her to pack her things and leave. Instead, Richard Blackwood did something completely unexpected. He walked across the room and sat down in one of the armchairs facing the piano. Would you play it again? He asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Sophia looked up, sure she had misheard him. Sir, the piece you wrote, he clarified. Would you play it again, please? For the first time since she had started working at the Blackwood mansion, Sophia looked directly into her employer's eyes. What she saw there wasn't anger or judgment. It was genuine interest, maybe even a touch of wonder. Slowly, Sophia nodded and returned to the piano bench. With trembling hands, she positioned her fingers over the keys and took a deep breath. Then she began to play once more, her own composition filling the grand salon as the millionaire sat perfectly still, listening as if his life depended on catching every note. Sophia's fingers danced across the piano keys, bringing her composition to life once more. She played with more confidence now, even with Richard Blackwood watching her. There was something freeing about having her secret talent discovered, like finally being able to breathe after holding her breath for too long. The music filled the grand salon, bouncing off the high ceilings and wrapping around the expensive furniture. Sophia closed her eyes as she reached the middle section of the piece, where the melody became more complex and emotional. This part had always been her favorite. She had written it during a rainstorm, inspired by the rhythmic pattern of droplets hitting her dormitory window. Richard Blackwood sat motionless in his armchair. His usual stern expression had softened, replaced by something Sophia couldn't quite name. Wonder perhaps, or nostalgia. He listened with his full attention, not checking his phone or looking distracted as he often did when staff spoke to him. When Sophia played the final notes, letting them hang in the air before fading to silence, neither of them spoke for several long moments. It was as if they both feared breaking the spell that had settled over the room. That was... Richard began, then paused, seeming to search for the right words. That was remarkable. Truly remarkable. Sophia's cheeks warmed at the praise. Thank you, sir. How long have you been playing? He asked, leaning forward slightly in his chair. Since I was 5, Sophia replied, her hands now resting quietly in her lap. My mother cleaned houses for a family that had a piano. They let me practice on it sometimes, and then my elementary school teacher noticed I had a talent for it. Richard nodded thoughtfully. And the conservatory? How did you end up there? Sophia's eyes drifted to the window, where the late afternoon sun painted the garden in golden light. I won a scholarship when I was 10. They had a program for gifted children from low-income families. I studied there until I was 25. And then? Richard prompted gently when she fell silent. Sophia hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about herself, especially not to someone like Mr. Blackwood who lived in a world so different from her own. But there was genuine interest in his eyes, and something about the moment made her want to share her story. My father got sick, she said simply. Cancer, the treatments were expensive. My mother couldn't handle the medical bills alone, and my younger brother was still in school. So I left the conservatory and came north to find work. The pay is better here. Richard's expression changed subtly, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. So you gave up music to support your family? It wasn't a question, but Sophia nodded anyway. Family comes first, she said, repeating the words that had become her mantra over the past few years. Besides, there are no guarantees in music. Even with my degree, I might have struggled to find work as a pianist. But to go from the conservatory to... Richard gestured vaguely around the room, seemingly catching himself before saying something that might sound insulting. To cleaning. Sophia finished for him with a small smile. It's honest work, Mr. Blackwood. I'm good at it, and it pays the bills. Richard stood up suddenly, straightening his suit jacket. For a moment, Sophia feared she had said something wrong, that the strange spell of their conversation had broken. But instead of dismissing her, he walked over to the piano and examined it more closely. This piano belonged to my grandmother, he said, running his fingers lightly over its polished surface. She played every day until arthritis made it too painful. After she died, no one in the family touched it. It's been sitting here for years, just being dusted. He turned to look at Sophia. Until today. Sophia didn't know how to respond to that. She stood up from the bench, suddenly aware that she had spent far too long away from her cleaning duties. I should get back to work, she said, reaching for the duster she had left on a side table. I'm sorry for using the piano without permission. Richard shook his head. Don't apologize. That's the first time this house has had any real music in it since I can remember. It was... He seemed to struggle for words again, It was nice. An awkward silence fell between them. Sophia wasn't sure what to do next. Should she thank him? Go back to cleaning? Pretend this whole strange interaction never happened? Before she could decide, Richard spoke again. Do you still practice regularly? Somewhere else, I mean. Sophia shook her head. No, sir. I don't have a piano. I live in a small apartment with 2 roommates. There's barely space for our beds, let alone a piano. So today was the first time you've played in almost 3 years, Sophia admitted, feeling a pang in her chest at saying the words aloud. 3 years without the thing that had once been the center of her life. Richard looked genuinely shocked. 3 years? And you played like that? Without any practice? Sophia shrugged, uncomfortable with his amazement. I practiced for 20 years before that. Some things your hands don't forget. Richard seemed to be considering something, his brow furrowed in thought. Then, as if coming to a decision, he gestured to the piano. Would you like to play it? Regularly, I mean. Sophia stared at him, sure she had misheard. I'm sorry? The piano, Richard clarified. It's just sitting here. It seems a waste, especially now that I know what it's capable of in the right hands. He cleared his throat. You could play after your work is done or during your breaks. Whatever works for you. Sophia felt her heart skip a beat. The offer was so unexpected, so incredible, that she didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, the part that had ached every time she passed by a music store or heard a concert on the radio. But another part hesitated. That's very kind of you, Mr. Blackwood, but I wouldn't want to impose or disturb anyone. You wouldn't be disturbing anyone, Richard assured her. I'm rarely home during the day, and when I am, I'm usually in my office on the other side of the house. He paused, then added more softly. And based on what I just heard, your playing would be anything but a disturbance. Sophia looked at the piano, feeling a pull toward it that was almost physical. The idea of being able to play again regularly was like being offered water after wandering in a desert. But she worried about crossing professional boundaries, about what the other staff might think. I don't know, she said hesitantly. Mrs. Porter might not approve of me using the family's belongings. Mrs. Porter works for me, not the other way around, Richard said with a hint of the authority she was more familiar with. Then his tone softened again. But I'll speak with her if that would make you more comfortable. Sophia nodded gratefully. Thank you, sir. I would appreciate that. Richard checked his watch, seeming to suddenly remember he had other matters to attend to. I should let you get back to your work, he said, his tone becoming more formal again. But please consider my offer. It would be a shame for that talent to go unused. I will, Sophia promised. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Richard nodded and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at her. That piece you wrote, does it have a name? Sophia felt a flush creep up her neck. I called it Memories of Home, she admitted. A small smile touched Richard's lips, the first real smile Sophia had ever seen from him. It's beautiful, he said simply, then disappeared down the hallway. Sophia stood alone in the grand salon, trying to process what had just happened. Had her employer really just offered to let her use his grandmother's priceless piano? And had he genuinely complimented her composition? It seemed too strange to be real. With a shake of her head, Sophia picked up her cleaning supplies and tried to return to her work routine. But something had shifted. As she dusted and polished, her mind kept returning to the piano, to the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers, to the way the music had filled the empty spaces inside her. That evening, as Sophia was preparing to leave, Mrs. Porter approached her with an unusual expression, somewhere between confusion and curiosity. Mr. Blackwood spoke to me about you, the head housekeeper said, watching Sophia's face carefully. He said you're to have access to the piano in the grand salon whenever you wish, as long as your duties are completed. Sophia nodded, still not quite believing it herself. He heard me playing today. I shouldn't have touched it without permission, but Mrs. Porter held up a hand to stop her. I've worked for the Blackwood family for 27 years, Sophia. I've never seen any of them take a personal interest in a staff member like this. Whatever you did on that piano, it clearly made an impression. Sophia wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she simply nodded again. He also asked me to give you this, Mrs. Porter continued, holding out a small key. It's to the music room on the 3rd floor. Apparently, there's a collection of sheet music there that belonged to his grandmother. He thought you might like to look through it. Sophia took the key with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she managed to say through her surprise. Mrs. Porter studied her face for a moment longer, then gave a small, approving nod. Mr. Blackwood's grandmother was a wonderful woman who believed that music brought life to a home. "This place has been too quiet since she passed. Perhaps that's about to change." With that cryptic comment, she turned and walked away, leaving Sophia standing in the hallway, clutching a small key that somehow felt like it might unlock more than just a room. The following morning, Sophia arrived at work earlier than usual. As she walked through the quiet house, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors, she felt a new sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she had something to look forward to beyond just earning her paycheck. She worked efficiently through her morning tasks, cleaning bathrooms and bedrooms with practiced ease. All the while, her mind drifted to the music room on the third floor and what treasures it might contain. When her lunch break came, instead of heading to the staff quarters, Sophia took the rarely used staircase to the third floor. With the small key Mrs. Porter had given her, she unlocked a door at the end of a long hallway, a door she had dusted many times but never opened. The music room was smaller than she expected, but what it lacked in size it made up for in charm. Unlike the modern, somewhat cold aesthetic of the rest of the house, this room felt warm and lived in. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with leather-bound classics but with sheet music of every kind. A comfortable-looking window seat overlooked the gardens, and in the corner stood a smaller upright piano, likely used for practice. Sophia ran her fingers along the spines of the music books, reading titles in half a dozen languages: Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart, Debussy, but also lesser-known composers and even jazz arrangements. It was a music lover's paradise. As she explored the room, Sophia noticed a framed photograph on the wall, an elderly woman sitting at the grand piano downstairs, her fingers poised over the keys, her face alight with joy. Richard Blackwood's grandmother, no doubt. The resemblance was there in the shape of the eyes, the strong jawline. Sophia felt a strange connection to this woman she had never met, another lover of music who had once filled this huge, empty house with beautiful sounds. On an impulse, Sophia sat at the upright piano and began to play a gentle melody, testing if the instrument was still in tune. To her delight, it was. The sound wasn't as rich as the grand piano downstairs, but it had a warm, intimate quality that suited the cozy room perfectly. As her fingers found their rhythm, Sophia felt something inside her begin to heal, a wound she had been carrying for 3 years without fully acknowledging its pain. Music had always been her voice, her way of expressing the things she couldn't put into words. Without it, a part of her had gone silent. Now, in this unexpected place, that voice was finding its way back. 3 days passed in which Sophia settled into a new routine. She would arrive at the Blackwood mansion early, complete her morning cleaning duties with focused efficiency, and then spend her lunch break in the music room on the third floor. The small upright piano became her friend, a confidant to whom she could whisper her thoughts through melody. In the afternoons, if she finished her work early, she would sometimes slip into the grand salon and play the magnificent Steinway. Those sessions were different, grander, more formal somehow. On the upright, she played for herself. On the Steinway, she played for the house, for the memory of the woman in the photograph, and perhaps, though she didn't quite admit it to herself, for Richard Blackwood, should he happen to be home. Sophia hadn't seen much of her employer since their strange encounter. He had been busy with meetings and phone calls, coming home late and leaving early. Twice she had glimpsed him in the hallway, and both times he had nodded to her with what seemed like particular recognition, a small acknowledgement of their shared secret. But no words had passed between them. On the third day, as Sophia was preparing to leave for the evening, Mrs. Porter approached her with an unusual request. "Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his study before you go," the head housekeeper said, her expression giving nothing away. Sophia felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. Had she done something wrong? Was he having second thoughts about letting her use the pianos? "Did he say what it's about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Porter shook her head. "No, but I wouldn't worry. He seemed to be in a good mood." That was hardly reassuring. In Sophia's experience, the moods of wealthy employers were as changeable as the weather. She made her way to Richard's study, a room she cleaned only once a week under strict instructions not to disturb any papers on his desk. It was a masculine space with dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and a large desk that faced the door. The wall behind the desk was lined with framed achievements, degrees, awards, newspaper articles about business deals. Sophia knocked softly on the open door. Richard was seated at his desk, focused on something on his computer screen. At her knock, he looked up and gestured for her to enter. "Sophia, thank you for coming. Please have a seat," he said, indicating one of the leather chairs facing his desk. She sat down stiffly, perched on the edge of the seat like a bird ready to take flight. Richard closed his laptop and gave her his full attention, which somehow made her even more nervous. "How are you finding the music room?" he asked, surprising her with the casual question. "It's wonderful," Sophia replied honestly. "Thank you again for allowing me to use it." Richard nodded, seemingly pleased with her answer. "My grandmother would have liked knowing someone was enjoying her collection. Music was her passion. This house used to be filled with it when I was a child visiting her." Sophia tried to imagine a younger version of this serious man sitting in a music-filled house, but the image wouldn't quite form. "Did you play too?" she asked before she could stop herself. A small smile touched Richard's lips. "She tried to teach me, but I had no talent for it. Business was more my calling." He gestured to the wall of achievements behind him. "But I've always appreciated music, even if I can't create it myself." There was a moment of silence, during which Sophia wondered if she should say something else or wait for him to get to the point of this meeting. "I've been thinking about your situation," Richard finally said, leaning forward slightly in his chair, "about how someone with your level of talent ended up cleaning houses instead of performing on stage." Sophia felt a twinge of discomfort. She didn't want pity, especially not from him. "As I said, family comes first," she replied, perhaps a bit more firmly than she intended. "I made my choice and I don't regret it." Richard held up a hand in a peaceful gesture. "I understand and I respect that choice. But what if there was a way for you to help your family and still reconnect with music?" Sophia frowned, not understanding where he was going with this. "What do you mean?" Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden for a moment before turning back to face her. "I'm hosting a charity gala here in 3 weeks," he explained. "It's an annual event to raise money for educational programs in underserved communities. The city's wealthiest and most influential people will be here. Business leaders, politicians, arts patrons." Sophia nodded slowly, still not seeing how this related to her. "Every year, I try to make the event memorable in some way," Richard continued, "something unique that sets it apart from the countless other charity functions these people attend. This year, I think that something could be you." Sophia's eyes widened. "Me? I'd like you to perform at the gala," Richard said simply. "A short recital, perhaps 3 or 4 pieces. I believe you would make quite an impression." Sophia stared at him, too stunned to speak. Her mind raced with a jumble of thoughts, confusion, fear, a flicker of excitement quickly smothered by doubt. "Mr. Blackwood," she finally managed, "I haven't performed in front of an audience in years. And these people, they're used to professional musicians, trained performers." "You are a trained performer," Richard pointed out. 20 years of practice and a conservatory education. That doesn't disappear just because you took a different path for a while." Sophia shook her head, her practical nature asserting itself. "Even if I wanted to, I would need time to prepare to practice properly. And my duties here can be adjusted," Richard finished for her. "I'm prepared to modify your work schedule. You would clean in the mornings and have your afternoons free for practice, with full pay, of course." Sophia sat back in her chair, trying to process what he was offering. It seemed too good to be true, which made her suspicious. "Why would you do this? For someone you barely know?" Richard considered her question seriously. "Several reasons," he said after a moment. "First, I genuinely believe you would be the highlight of the evening. These people have seen and heard everything. Having someone with your talent perform would be special." He paused, then continued more slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "Second, I believe in second chances. Life takes unexpected turns for all of us. Sometimes we need help finding our way back to the path we were meant to follow." There was something in his voice when he said this, a hint of personal experience that made Sophia wonder what paths Richard Blackwood might have strayed from in his own life. "And third," he added with unexpected frankness, "it would make a compelling story. The maid with the hidden talent, discovered by chance making her debut at the city's most exclusive social event. People love stories like that. At least he was honest about that part, Sophia thought. There was something almost refreshing about his admission that her story would add an interesting narrative to his event. I don't know, she said hesitantly. It's been so long, and these people are just people, Richard said firmly. Wealthy ones, yes, but still just people who can recognize beauty when they hear it. Sophia looked down at her. Hands, the hands that had once been meant for piano keys but had spent the last 3 years scrubbing floors and dusting furniture. Could they really return to their original purpose even for one night? You don't have to decide right now, Richard said, sensing her uncertainty. Think about it overnight, but I hope you'll say yes. Sophia nodded, grateful for the reprieve. I will think about it. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Blackwood. As she stood to leave, Richard added one more thing. Oh, and if you do agree, I'd like to arrange for you to work with a coach, someone to help you prepare. I know a retired concert pianist who teaches a select few students. He's a friend of the family. Sophia paused at the door, turning back to look at him. There was kindness in his offer, yes, but also something else. A businessman's calculation. An eye for opportunity and good stories. Richard Blackwood wasn't doing this solely out of the goodness of his heart. Yet, did that matter if the opportunity was real? I'll let you know my decision tomorrow, she said. That night, in her small apartment across town, Sophia lay awake long after her roommates had fallen asleep. Their place was cramped. 3 women sharing a 2-bedroom apartment to save on rent. And she could hear Luisa's soft snoring from the other bed. Sophia stared at the water stain on the ceiling, thinking about Richard's offer. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. The chance to play again, to be recognized for her talent rather than her cleaning abilities, to step back into the world she had reluctantly left behind. It was tempting beyond words. But another part hesitated. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all those important people? What if this was just some rich man's whim and he changed his mind halfway through? Sophia turned onto her side, pulling her thin blanket up to her chin. Through the apartment's cheap walls, she could hear a baby crying in the next unit, a television playing somewhere else. So different from the grand, quiet spaces of the Blackwood mansion. She thought about her family back home. Her father, still recovering but doing better. Her mother, working long hours at the local market. Her brother, now in his final year of school. The money she sent home each month had helped them survive, had paid for her father's treatments. Would taking afternoons off to practice, even with full pay, somehow be betraying her responsibility to them? But then again, wasn't this exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of? Not fame or fortune, but simply the chance to play again, to be seen as more than just a pair of hands that cleaned. Sophia closed her eyes and imagined herself at the piano in the grand salon, playing for a room full of elegantly dressed people. The image was both thrilling and terrifying. As dawn broke over the city, Sophia made her decision. She arrived at the Blackwood mansion earlier than usual that morning. To her surprise, Richard was in the kitchen having coffee, dressed casually in a sweater rather than his usual suit. He looked up when she entered, and there was a question in his eyes. I'll do it, Sophia said simply. Before she could change her mind, Richard's face broke into a genuine smile, the second real one she had seen from him. Excellent, he said, setting down his coffee cup. We'll start today. I've already spoken with Mrs. Porter about adjusting your schedule. Sophia nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and terror swirling in her stomach. What should I play? Richard considered this. Something that showcases your technical abilities, certainly, but more importantly, something that moves people. He looked at her thoughtfully. Including your own composition, I think. Memories of Home would make a perfect finale. Sophia felt a flutter of panic at the idea of playing her own music for an audience of strangers. I'm not sure about that part. Trust me, Richard said with the confidence of someone used to being right. It's perfect, and Leo will agree with me. Leo? Leonardo Vega, the piano coach I mentioned. He'll be here this afternoon to meet you. Richard glanced at his watch. I have to get ready for a meeting, but we'll talk more later. In the meantime, why don't you go up to the music room and start looking through my grandmother's collection? See if anything speaks to you. As Richard left the kitchen, Sophia stood still, trying to absorb the sudden changes in her life. Yesterday, she had been a maid who secretly played the piano. Today, she was preparing to perform at one of the city's most exclusive social events. It felt like a dream, the kind that could either turn into something wonderful or vanish like morning mist. But for now at least, Sophia allowed herself to hope that perhaps life had more in store for her than she had dared to believe. The 3 weeks leading up to the gala passed in a blur of cleaning and practicing. Sophia's days now had a rhythm as structured as any musical composition. Mornings spent dusting and polishing. Afternoons devoted to the piano under the watchful eye of Leonardo Vega. Leo, as he insisted she call him, was nothing like Sophia had expected. In her mind, a renowned concert pianist would be stern and intimidating. Instead, Leo was a cheerful man in his 60s with wild silver hair and a booming laugh that echoed through the music room. He had retired from performing a decade ago after a wrist injury, but had lost none of his passion for music. "Play it again," Leo would say, pacing around the piano. But this time, "Don't just play the notes, tell me a story." At first, Sophia had been nervous around him, afraid of disappointing someone so accomplished. But Leo had a way of putting her at ease, of making her forget everything except the music. "You have a gift," he told her during their first session, after she played a piece by Chopin. "Not just technique, many people have that. You have heart. You make the piano sing." Under Leo's guidance, Sophia selected 3 pieces for the gala. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece Richard had first heard her play. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a challenging piece that would showcase her technical skill. And her own composition, Memories of Home. Sophia had initially resisted including her own piece, but both Richard and Leo had insisted. "It's what makes you unique," Richard had argued. "Anyone can play Chopin or Rachmaninoff. Your composition is yours alone." As the days passed, Sophia felt herself changing. The stiffness in her shoulders, earned from years of cleaning, began to ease. Her hands, once rough from work, softened as she applied the hand cream Leo had given her. Most importantly, something within her was awakening, a part of herself she had packed away along with her sheet music when she left the conservatory. There were challenges, of course. Balancing her cleaning duties with practice was exhausting, even with her adjusted schedule. Some days her fingers fumbled over passages that should have been simple. Doubt would creep in, whispering that she wasn't good enough, that she was foolish to think she could step back into the world of music after so long away. On those days, it was usually Leo who pulled her back from the edge of despair. "Music is not about perfection," he would tell her. "It's about connection. When you play from your heart, people feel it. They connect with you. That's worth more than playing every note perfectly." A week before the gala, Richard surprised Sophia with another gesture. He appeared in the music room during her practice session with a garment bag in hand. "For the performance," he said, hanging the bag on a hook on the wall. "I hope it fits." Mrs. Porter helped with the sizing. After he left, Sophia unzipped the bag with trembling hands. Inside was an evening gown in deep blue, simple but elegant, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light. Sophia had never owned anything so beautiful. "Try it on," Leo encouraged her, turning his back to give her privacy. The dress fit perfectly, the fabric flowing around her like water. When Leo turned back, his eyes widened. "Richard was right," he said softly. "They won't know what hit them." The night of the gala arrived with a mixture of rain and nerves. Sophia spent the day helping the staff prepare the mansion, unable to sit still with nervous energy. Florists transformed the entrance hall with elaborate arrangements. Caterers bustled in the kitchen, preparing trays of delicate appetizers. A small army of workers set up round tables in the ballroom, covering them with crisp white tablecloths and centerpieces of orchids and candles. By late afternoon, Sophia retreated to a guest room that Mrs. Porter had set aside for her to get ready. She showered and dried her hair, letting it fall in soft waves instead of her usual practical bun. She applied light makeup, another gift from Richard delivered by Mrs. Porter along with a note, "To help you look the part." As Sophia slipped into the blue gown, she caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Gone was the woman in the maid's uniform with the tired eyes. In her place stood someone who looked like she belonged in the glittering world that would soon fill the mansion. A knock at the door startled her. It was Mrs. Porter coming to check on her. "Oh my," the older woman said, her usual professional reserve slipping for a moment. "You look beautiful, Sophia." "Thank you," Sophia replied, smoothing the dress nervously. I feel a bit like I'm in a dream. Mrs. Porter smiled knowingly. Dreams can come true, you know. Not often, but sometimes. She checked her watch. The guests will start arriving in 30 minutes. Mr. Blackwood asked me to bring you to the sitting room when you're ready. He wants to speak with you before the performance. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. I'm ready. The sitting room was a smaller space off the main hall, designed for private conversations away from larger gatherings. Richard was waiting there, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He turned when Sophia entered, and for a moment he simply stared at her. You look... He began, then seemed to reconsider his words. Are you ready for tonight? Sophia nodded, clasping her hands to keep them from shaking. I think so. A little nervous. That's natural, Richard said. But you've prepared well. Leo says you're going to amaze everyone. Sophia managed a small smile. Let's hope he's right. Richard walked to a side table and picked up a small velvet box. I have something for you. A tradition of sorts. My grandmother wore these when she performed. He opened the box to reveal a pair of simple pearl earrings. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, just classic and elegant, like the music Sophia would play. I couldn't possibly, she started to say, but Richard shook his head. Please. She would have wanted you to have them. Consider it a good luck charm. Sophia hesitantly took the box. Thank you. I'll take good care of them. As she put on the earrings, Richard explained how the evening would unfold. The guests are arriving now for cocktails. Dinner will be served at 7. After the main course, I'll give a short speech about the charity, and then I'll introduce you. The piano has been moved to the raised area at the end of the ballroom. Sophia nodded, taking mental notes to distract herself from her nerves. Don't worry about the crowd, Richard added, seeming to sense her anxiety. When you play, just focus on the music. The rest will take care of itself. From the hallway came the sounds of arriving guests, murmured conversations, occasional laughter, the clink of glasses. The night had begun. I should greet my guests, Richard said. Leo will come for you when it's time. Just remember, you've earned this moment. With those words, he left Sophia alone with her thoughts and the weight of expectations. The next 2 hours passed in a strange haze. Sophia waited in the sitting room, occasionally hearing bursts of laughter or conversation from the main areas of the house. Leo checked on her a few times, offering reassurance and reminding her to breathe. They're just people, he told her. Rich people, yes, but still just people. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Leo came to get her. It's time, he said, offering his arm. Sophia took a deep breath and stood up. I'm ready. They walked together toward the ballroom where the dinner was just concluding. Through the partially open doors, Sophia could see dozens of elegantly dressed people seated at round tables. The lighting was low, with candles providing most of the illumination. At the far end of the room, the grand piano waited on a slightly raised platform, its lid open and gleaming under subtle spotlights. As they waited in the hallway, Sophia could hear Richard addressing the crowd, his voice confident and clear. And so this foundation has helped over 500 children from underprivileged backgrounds access quality education in the past year alone. Your generosity tonight will help us reach even more. There was polite applause, and then Richard continued. Before we move to the silent auction portion of our evening, I have something special to share with you. A few weeks ago, I made an unexpected discovery in my own home. I returned early from a business trip to find the most extraordinary music coming from my grandmother's piano. Sophia's heart pounded as she listened to Richard telling their story, how he had found her playing, learned about her conservatory background, and her choice to support her family. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing this remarkable talent. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sophia Mendez. Leo squeezed Sophia's hand. Remember what I told you. Just tell your story through the music. Sophia nodded and walked into the ballroom as the crowd applauded politely. The faces turned toward her were curious, perhaps skeptical. These people were used to professional performers at such events. What could a maid possibly have to offer? Sophia kept her eyes on the piano, moving toward it as if drawn by an invisible thread. When she reached it, she took a moment to adjust the bench, then sat down. The room fell silent as she placed her hands on the keys. In that moment of silence, Sophia closed her eyes and thought of her journey, from the conservatory to cleaning houses, from hiding her talent to sitting here in this beautiful gown. She thought of her family back home, of her father's smile when she had called to tell him about this opportunity. She thought of Leo's guidance and Richard's unexpected belief in her. Then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne floated through the air, gentle and hesitant at first, like a question. Sophia felt her nerves melt away as she surrendered to the music, letting it flow through her fingers and into the room. The piece was familiar, comforting, the first one Richard had heard her play. As she reached its emotional center, Sophia dared to look up at the audience. The skepticism was gone from their faces, replaced by something Sophia hadn't expected: wonder. They were listening, truly listening, their conversations and champagne forgotten. Sophia's confidence grew as she finished the piece, the final notes lingering in the air before the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Without pausing to acknowledge it, Sophia moved directly into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This piece was a risk, complex, demanding, usually performed with an orchestra, but Leo had helped her adapt it for solo piano, preserving its power and emotion. As her fingers flew across the keys, navigating the challenging passages with growing assurance, Sophia felt a kind of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. She was no longer a maid playing the piano. She was simply a musician, doing what she was born to do. When the last powerful chord of the Rachmaninoff piece resonated through the ballroom, there was a moment of stunned silence before the applause began, louder this time, with a few people rising to their feet. Sophia allowed herself a small smile as she prepared for her final piece. She looked up and caught Richard's eye from where he stood at the side of the room. He gave her a slight nod as if to say, "This is your moment. Take it." Taking a deep breath, Sophia began to play Memories of Home. Her own composition was more modern than the classical pieces, with hints of folk melodies from her homeland woven throughout. It told her story, the joy of childhood, the hope of the conservatory years, the pain of leaving, and finally, a cautious return to hope. As the last notes faded, Sophia kept her eyes closed, not yet ready to break the spell. The silence stretched for one heartbeat, then two, before the room erupted in a standing ovation. When Sophia finally opened her eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected, not just applause but emotion on the faces of these wealthy strangers. Some were wiping away tears, others smiling broadly as they clapped. In that moment, Sophia understood what Leo had been trying to tell her. It wasn't about playing perfectly, it was about connection, and somehow through her music, she had connected with every person in that room. Sophia stood from the piano bench and offered a shy bow as the applause continued. The room was on its feet, faces shining with genuine appreciation. She caught sight of Richard at the side of the room, clapping with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, a proud smile lighting up his usually serious face. Beside him, Leo was beaming like a father at his daughter's first recital. As Sophia moved to leave the platform, a tall woman in a striking red dress approached her. The crowd parted for her with the kind of deference that spoke of importance. "That was extraordinary," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Eliza Chen, director of the Manhattan Symphony Orchestra." Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she shook the woman's hand. The Manhattan Symphony was one of the most prestigious orchestras in the country. "Thank you," Sophia managed to say. "That's very kind." "Kind has nothing to do with it," Eliza replied with a warm smile. "That was genuine talent. I'd love to speak with you further. Do you have a card?" Sophia felt a moment of embarrassment. Of course she didn't have business cards. She was a housekeeper, not a professional musician. Before she could respond, Richard appeared at her side. "Perhaps you could leave your contact information with me, Eliza," he suggested smoothly. "I'll make sure Sophia gets it," Eliza nodded. "Wonderful. Please do get in touch, Ms. Mendez. I think we might have something to discuss." With a final smile, she rejoined the crowd, which had broken into excited conversations. "You did it," Richard said quietly to Sophia. "You were magnificent." Sophia felt lightheaded with adrenaline and relief. Did that really just happen? "The director of the Manhattan Symphony wants to talk to me." Richard's eyes crinkled with amusement. "She's not the only one. Look around." Sophia glanced around the room and noticed several people watching her, clearly waiting for a chance to speak with her. It was surreal. Just hours ago, she had been helping set up for this event. Now she was its star. "Come," Richard said. "There are some people you should meet." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and compliments. Sophia met composers, music teachers, arts patrons, and fellow musicians, all eager to speak with her, to learn her story, to offer congratulations or opportunities. She tried to remember names and faces, but there were so many, and she was still floating on the high of her performance. Throughout it all, Richard remained nearby, smoothly facilitating introductions and occasionally rescuing her when a conversation went on too long. It was a side of him Sophia hadn't seen before. Charming, socially adept, genuinely pleased by her success. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin, a distinguished-looking man approached them. He had silver hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. "Richard, my friend," he greeted warmly. "You've outdone yourself this time." "Thomas," Richard replied, shaking the man's hand. "I'm glad you could make it. Allow me to introduce Sophia Mendez, our pianist for the evening." "Sophia, this is Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Classical Records." Sophia's eyes widened. Classical Records was one of the most prestigious classical music labels in the world. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, taking his outstretched hand. "It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," Thomas replied. "Your performance tonight was remarkable, particularly your original composition. It's been a long time since I've heard something that fresh and emotionally honest in the classical world." Sophia felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "Thank you. It's very personal to me. Music should be personal," Thomas said with a nod. "That's what connects with people." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of recording your work, both your interpretations of the classics and your original compositions. Please call my office next week." Sophia took the card with trembling fingers. "I will. Thank you." As Thomas moved away to say his goodbyes to other guests, Sophia turned to Richard, speechless. "Don't look so surprised," he said with a small smile. "You earned this." By midnight, the last guest had departed. The catering staff was quietly cleaning up, and Sophia stood in the grand salon, still in her evening gown, looking at the pile of business cards she had collected. Each represented an opportunity she couldn't have imagined just a month ago. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked, joining her with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her. "Overwhelmed," Sophia admitted, taking the glass. "I never expected any of this." "But you hoped for it once," Richard said, "before life took you in a different direction." Sophia nodded, thinking back to her days at the conservatory, to the dreams she'd had before her father's illness changed everything. "Yes, I did." They sipped their champagne in comfortable silence for a moment. The house felt peaceful after the buzz of the gala. "What happens now?" Sophia finally asked. Richard considered her question. "That depends on you. Based on the reactions tonight, you have options. Eliza Chen doesn't approach people casually. Neither does Thomas Reynolds. But my job here," Sophia said hesitantly. "My family." "Your family would want you to pursue your gift," Richard said gently. "And as for your job," he shrugged, "the house will always need cleaning, but not necessarily by you." The implication was clear. He was releasing her from her obligation, giving her permission to follow this new path. Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why did you do all this for me? You barely knew me." Richard looked down at his champagne glass, turning it slowly in his hands. "When I heard you play that first day, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What was that?" "That wealth isn't just about money or possessions. True wealth is finding the thing you were born to do and having the chance to do it." He looked up at her. "My grandmother understood that. Music was her wealth. Business is mine, and clearly music is yours." Sophia felt the truth of his words resonate within her. Playing tonight had felt like coming home to herself after a long absence. "I'm grateful," she said simply. "For everything you've done?" Richard raised his glass. "To new beginnings." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Sophia stood in the wings of Lincoln Center, waiting to make her debut with the Manhattan Symphony Orchestra. After that night at the Blackwood Mansion, her life had transformed with breathtaking speed. Eliza Chen had offered her a position with the orchestra, not as the principal pianist right away, but with solo opportunities that would allow her to grow into the role. Thomas Reynolds had signed her to a recording contract for an album that would include both classical pieces and her own compositions, which now numbered more than a dozen. Sophia had moved from her cramped apartment into a small but comfortable place, with enough room for the baby grand piano that was her first major purchase. Her family had come to visit, her father's health now stable enough for travel. Their pride in her success had brought tears to her eyes. As for Richard, he had become something unexpected, a friend. He had established a foundation in Sophia's name that provided scholarships for talented musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds, enabling them to study at prestigious conservatories without the financial burdens that had forced Sophia to abandon her dreams. 5 minutes. Ms. Mendez, a stagehand, informed her. Sophia nodded, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. She was dressed in a new gown, emerald green this time, but simple and elegant like the blue one from the gala. Around her neck was a small pendant containing a photo of her family. In her ears, the pearl earrings that had once belonged to Richard's grandmother, now a gift rather than a loan. "You ready?" Leo asked, appearing beside her. He had become her regular coach, helping her prepare for performances and recordings. "As I'll ever be," Sophia replied with a smile. "Remember," Leo said, squeezing her hand, "just tell your story through the music. The rest will take care of itself." The stage manager signaled that it was time. Sophia walked onto the brightly lit stage to enthusiastic applause. The concert hall was packed, every seat filled. In the front row, she spotted Richard, elegantly dressed as always, but more relaxed than she had ever seen him at the mansion. As Sophia took her place at the piano and nodded to the conductor, she allowed herself a moment to marvel at the journey that had brought her here, from cleaning the Blackwood mansion to performing at Lincoln Center, from hiding her talent to sharing it with the world. The conductor raised his baton and Sophia placed her fingers on the keys. As the orchestra began the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece she had played at the gala, now with full orchestral backing, Sophia closed her eyes and let the music flow through her. This was where she belonged. This was her true voice. And it had been inside her all along, waiting for the chance to sing again. The next day, a video clip of Sophia's performance went viral online. It was picked up by news outlets and shared widely on social media, often accompanied by the story of how she had been discovered, the maid who played the piano when she thought no one was listening. In interviews, reporters always asked Richard about his role in discovering this remarkable talent. The usually eloquent businessman found himself struggling to put his feelings into words. Sometimes, he would say after a thoughtful pause, "Extraordinary beauty exists right in front of us and we just don't see it. We get caught up in routines and expectations and forget to really look at the people around us." He would pause again, remembering that moment of standing in the doorway of his grand salon, hearing the most beautiful music coming from the most unexpected source. "Sophia taught me something important," he would continue. "She reminded me to see people for who they truly are, not just the roles they play in our lives. We're all more than our jobs or circumstances. Sometimes we just need someone to notice." In her new apartment, Sophia kept a framed photograph on top of her piano, not of herself performing at Lincoln Center or signing her recording contract, but a simple picture of the music room on the 3rd floor of the Blackwood mansion. It was where her second chance had truly begun, where she had rediscovered the part of herself she thought had been lost forever. Whenever she felt overwhelmed by her new life, the concerts, the recordings, the interviews, she would look at that photograph and remember the journey. From a maid who secretly played the piano, to a concert pianist who once worked as a maid, from giving up her dreams to finding them again in the most unexpected place. And she would sit at her piano and play memories of home, adding new passages that spoke of transformation, of second chances, and of the unexpected ways that life can lead us back to ourselves.